Thank you. Welcome to this Mid-Suffolk Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Keith Wellham and I'm chairing the meeting today. May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Do not interrupt other speakers. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure that your mobile phones are on silent or switched off and the volume on your laptops and other devices are turned down to 0. Additionally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film or photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. So, in attendance at the present time, we have the members of the committee. We have, I believe, I may miss somebody out, I'll try not to, Melissa Evans, who is the Director for Corporate Resources, Emily Atack at the back there, Director for Assets and Investments, Holly Brett, Corporate Manager for the Council's companies, and we've got other people here as well. So could you introduce your colleagues, please, Melissa?
I can do, yeah. To my left, I've got Sharon Bayliss, who's the I forgot your title, Service Improvement Advisor and Operations, but she's been helping us out on the budget. And then to my right, I've got Rebecca Hewitt, who's the Corporate Manager for Finance and Commission and Procurement. Thank you.
And we also have Councillor John Whitehead, who is the Cabinet Member for Finance. We have Susie Morley, who is the leader of Mid-Suffolk Council, and we have Andrew Mellon, who is the lead signatory for the call-in, and we're all being supported by various governance support officers. Thank you. So can I move to the agenda, please? And agenda item 1 is apologies for absence and substitutions, please.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary or other registrable or non-registrable interests by members? There are none. Have there been any petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Questions by the public. We have a question from Victoria Cutmore of Endurance Estates of 1 Station Road, Foxton, Cambridge, and she asks, given there is a justified need for housing in Elmswell, as set out in Cabinet Report MCA 2227, and a desire for a new primary school in Elmswell, are members aware that the land to the east of Eastern Way, Elmswell, is available to provide an exemplar housing development and land for a future primary school as an alternative to or in addition to the land at Church Road? And we have an answer to Victoria Cutmore's question from the Director of Planning, which I will read out. The Council is aware of land held by Endurance Estates in Elmswell, which was promoted to the Council through the Babergh and Mid-Suffolk joint local plan process. There is a locally expressed desire for a new primary school, but it should be noted that this is not a feature of Suffolk County Council's Education and Learning Infrastructure Plan or this Council's Joint Infrastructure Delivery Plan. The Council will be developing its Part 2 Joint Local Plan in accordance with the timetable published in its Local Development Scheme, which will include a call for sites. Elmswell are also developing their own neighbourhood plan, which would provide a further mechanism for you to promote your land for development. And as the questioner is not present, there will not be a follow-up question, but she has heard and will receive a written response to her question. Thank you. Are there any questions by councillors, please?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Now we move on to item 6, which is the General Fund and Housing Revenue Account for 2023-24, review of savings, proposals and updated position. Can I remind members that we are considering at this item both the General Fund and the Housing Revenue Account? I think that Babergh members, or at least one of them, got a bit confused when they thought that they were two separate items. This is just to make it absolutely clear there is one item, and I'd like to invite the Cabinet Member for Finance to introduce the report to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, members. At the November ONS committee meeting, you reviewed the set of assumptions behind our draft budgets for 23-24, and both I and officers appreciated the observations and recommendations arising from your debate on the subject, and which have been carefully considered over the intervening period as further iterations of the draft budget have been developed. Today, this new report provides ONS with the opportunity to consider the latest draft budgets for the General Fund and the HRA before they go to Cabinet on the 6th of February and then to full Council on the 23rd of February. Subsequent to our last meeting, we now have the benefit of the Q2 monitoring report for the current year. Central Government has announced its provisional settlement for 23-24, and Government has determined the maximum increase permissible for council house rents in 23-24. Paragraph 3.2 sets out the headlines of the Q2 monitoring position. The key headlines from the Government settlement are set out in paragraph 4.10, and information arising from the Government's decision on 23-24 maximum rent increases is set out in paragraphs 5.10 to 5.12. We are happy to answer any questions you have arising from those three developments. Now, starting with the General Fund, we have set out a summary table, table 1 in the report, showing how the financial pressures, savings and additional income, reserve movements and funding changes have each impacted, positively or negatively, on the 23-24 position. There are some significant numbers here, so we've broken them out into components of the pressures and savings in tables 2 and tables 3. Now, tables such as these can only include a very brief description for each of those components, but hopefully many, if not all, will be self-explanatory. But again, we'd be happy to explain any of them in more detail if committee members request further clarification. Our reserve position in Mid-Suffolk remains strong, and as explained in paragraph 4.18, we've recently received some significant capital receipts from Gateway 14, to the extent that we no longer need to set aside the large commercial development risk management reserve. At the February Cabinet meeting, I'll be recommending that the reserve is repurposed, along with the Growth and Efficiency Fund, into a new combined Strategic Transformation and Infrastructure Fund. We have in the pipeline some ambitious projects to finance, such as the Shelf Project and the Skills and Innovation Centre on Gateway 14. I trust that members on the committee will conclude that the report presented today demonstrates that the General Fund for 23-24 is in a good position. There is a forecasted surplus of over 3 million for 23-24 General Fund, despite all these cost pressures, and in these circumstances, I feel it would be perverse to recommend anything other than a council tax freeze for our Mid-Suffolk share of the overall 23-24 precept. Now, turning to the HRA, it is clear that we do face a more challenging situation in this ring-fenced account. We anticipate a deficit outturn in 22-23, and we are presenting a deficit budget for 23-24. We can tolerate that in the short term by funding the deficits from reserves, but clearly that can't be sustainable in the medium to long term. Given all the disruption from COVID, the unprecedented inflation in material repairs and build costs, and the challenges raised by our net zero commitments, the housing team will, as a matter of urgency, be producing a revised 30-year business plan for the HRA during 23-24. So I regard this HRA budget for the next year as a realistic assessment of the next 12 months ahead, whilst a business plan to tackle the many challenges faced by the HRA is developed during that period. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We now have a time for Councillor Morley.
Thank you, Chair. For this item, I'm substituting for Councillor Haddingham for the housing portfolio. And if you're willing, I'd like to read out a statement on her behalf.
Yes, sorry, I wasn't aware that you were doing that. Yes, please carry on.
I'm multitasking. Thank you, Chair. The HRA, like the General Fund, is under increasing pressure, partially due to rising costs for materials, pay awards, and an ageing housing stock. The Government has recommended an increase in rents of 7%, and the Council has recommended that this be put forward as the increase for next year. Even with this increase, there is a deficit of £409,000. Furthermore, the previous rent reductions have increased the risk to the HRA. This, with increasing regulation and an urgent need for sustainability to our stock, means the future will be challenging. Officers are working to increase income, particularly around maximising garage rentals, an area currently underperforming, and driving down rent arrears by providing additional support to tenants and maximising the impact of our RentSense software. Officers are currently working with a provider to overhaul the business plan. This will allow members to take a 30-year view of income and proposed expenditure, and members can expect this at the next round of budget setting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to questions now. If there are questions which you would like a more detailed housing response to, I understand that the Director Housing is online and probably watching and will wave a hand if she has an answer for us to one of our questions. So it's questions only, questions of Cabinet members and officers. So who would like to start? Councillor Ekping-Yong, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Councillor Whitehead has given us a really good summary of where we are with the General Fund. My question is really with regard to the table number 4, which relates to savings and increases in incomes, which in total represent probably just over 50% mitigation against the pressures. My concern is as to whether actually how realistic these savings and increases are. I note the fact that 10% of them are earmarked as other, and what would happen if they didn't realise.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. Well, obviously, a lot of time and effort has been put into both the, identifying the pressures and looking for mitigating savings or increase in income. They are evolving. I think there may be some concerns about one or two headings, for example, the reprofiling of the leisure contract, just because of the pressures that are coming through at the moment. But as a general rule, I think they're reasonably sound, and bear in mind that we're still reporting a surplus of 3 million for next year. That's a great deal of headroom against potential savings there of 2.2 million.
Is there a follow-up? Right. Anyone else? This could be a very quick meeting. Councillor Caston and then Councillor Scarr. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like a little bit more information on in Table 3 to the General Fund pressures. The first one being the removing of the savings contingency. and the second one, the increase in the training budget and the thoughts behind those as pressures, please.
In terms of the first question, the 90,000 removal of savings contingency, I'm going to ask one of my finance colleagues who live and breathe it day to day to just answer that one. And if you any comments you want to make on the training budget as well, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead, and thank you for the question. So the savings contingency was a historical budget line we had in that was set aside for aspirations around savings targets. So what we've done is stripped that out and replaced it with more robust savings proposals, if you like. So I was never a fan of kind of a savings contingency. For me, I like, a detailed plan to sit behind that. So that's just removing that element of contingency, if you like, that I wasn't particularly comfortable with because there was no plans behind it, if you like. And your second question around the training budget, some of that is a carry forward and some of it is additional budget. And that's as a response to a lot of work the HR and OD team have been doing with officers around training needs. There's a lot of equality and diversity training we want to undertake next year. There's also a large-scale leadership programme we want to introduce, supporting our apprentices as well. We want to really invest in that side of things as well. And I think our learning platform, because we want to invest in that as well, I think that's going to cost us a little bit more next year as well. So there's some detailed learning and development coming through from that additional budget.
Thank you. Councillor Scarf.
Yep, we're back again. Okay, couple of questions really. On page 11, you talk about the combination of the Development Risk Management Reserve and the Growth Efficiency Reserve being amalgamated by Cabinet into a new Strategic Infrastructure Fund. One question on that, it's my understanding that members' locality budgets are funded currently from the Growth and Efficiency Fund. Does this new Strategic Infrastructure Fund allow us to have the flexibility to fund ongoing members' locality budgets? That's question one. And then on page 14, when we're talking about 5.11, it said it's been assumed that there will be no properties purchased by the tenant through the right to buy mechanism for 23-24, and the number of voids is based on the 2022 to 23 rate of 7%. Why will there be no, why is the assumption basically that there are going to be no right to buys this year? Is that because of the economic conditions? Is that based on previous factors? Because I might be wrong, but I think in a previous year there was 12, so why would there be none this year? I'd just like some explanation on that one. And finally, just a comment. I'm really pleased that you've taken on board the Overview and Scrutiny's recommendations about the garage rents increase. I know it's a small sum, but I'm very pleased to see it in the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my understanding is that we have the same amount in for this coming year for the localities localities grants funding, and certainly no change in the status of reserves which should affect that going forward. I think we all value very much the opportunity to help our local communities through the local government, the local localities grant scheme. And in terms of your questions on the HRA, I certainly have a lot of sympathy with what you're asking in terms of the fact that we're assuming no right to buy. The numbers do vary year to year, so it's very much almost like a bit of a lottery to decide what figure to use. A figure of 0 has been chosen, which is probably not an over-prudent figure, but within the whole scheme of things of 3,000 houses, it'll only be a trivial amount in terms of lost rent. And of course, any right to buy can happen any time during the year as well, so it wouldn't be a full year's rental loss. but rather than just pluck a figure out of the air, particularly in the present situation and the cost of living crisis, we've just gone for zero. Your question about the 7% voice, well, that's based on last year's figure. So we're just assuming that going forward at the moment. Say this is obviously a draft budget, and I note your comments and appreciate the thoughts from ONS in terms of garage rents, and we were pleased to incorporate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question at all? Not at present. Councillor Ekping, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a follow-up to Councillor Scott's question, in fact. And there are two of them. One is with regard to the locality budget, would the portfolio holder and the officers look at possibly increasing the locality budgets for the next financial year? There are a lot of pressures within our communities to help them with lots of different projects, and anyone involved in it would have known that the monies that we had this year just didn't go far enough. So that's my first point question. And second is, I'm trying to understand why the lack of properties purchased through the right to buy mechanism would generate an additional 1.3 million of income, if that could be explained.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's in terms of the localities budget, at the moment, I say we've got the same amount going forward to this current year. I can certainly understand in times of 10% inflation there might be a valid reason to increase that, and if ONS want to put that forward as a recommendation for us to think about at our cabinet meeting, then then obviously ONS can do that. In terms of your question about the 1.3 million, are you looking at table 9 and the 1.297? Is that what?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I'm looking at item 5.11.
Yeah. So I think there's a certain lack of clarity, I think, in the wording there, because the 1293 additional income includes all the extra rental income from putting the rents up by 7%, plus the right to buy assumptions, plus the voice assumptions. It's almost like, I think, 5.10 and 5.11 perhaps could have been run into just one paragraph, because I'll just clarify that. Yes, yeah. So I said that the big driver there is the 1.297 million is generated from the rent increase of 7%, and that's reduced a little bit by the voice and right to buy assumptions. Thank you.
Any further questions from anybody? Can I ask a question about the HRA account? And I failed to introduce the Director of Operations, who is with us. And this may be a question for him, so only fair to introduce him. My question is around the availability and cost of materials and tradespeople, and predicting inflation and so on. I've had a number of officers who've said to me it's very difficult to get roofers, or it's very difficult to get various different trades, and in any case the materials are still going up. So how confident are you, or how confident is the Director of Housing that we've got the right sort of amount of money in the sums there in the table? And what happens if we can't get the materials and the tradespeople? Does that mean that the work is delayed yet again? That's been delayed through COVID, shortage of materials, shortage of tradespeople. Are we out of the woods as far as those sorts of things are concerned, please? Yeah.
Shall I come in?
Yes, please do.
Good afternoon, members. So in terms of being out of the woods, we are in the situation where we have got a reducing number of outstanding repairs. What we've done to try and mitigate some of the challenges is bring on bring on a number of contractors on a short-term basis. And what we're working through at the moment is our transformation, as you'll be aware. And this does include looking at a framework of contractors in addition to our own trades team. So what that will enable us to do is to deal with the ebb and flow of works as it comes through. And it is good practice to always have a number of options. So that's what we'll be doing going forward. And as I've just alluded to, in the short term, we have got some short-term contracts in place. In terms of whether we've got the correct budget there, we've done a substantial amount of work on budgets, looking at what we think the cost will be over the next few years. We've also been looking at our capital costs in terms of component replacements, kitchens, bathroom, rewires, etc. So we think we're there. And we are currently also working with a provider who's got expertise in business planning for the HRA, and we are planning an overhaul of our business plan, and this will hopefully give members more assurance in the future around what our income will be and what our expected costs will be. I'm not sure if there's any follow-up questions after that.
Thank you. Not a follow-up question, but is a completely different question, and that is, I think it is for you, Deborah, and it's around void times, void percentages, and so on. Overview and Scrutiny did quite a lot of work on looking at voids 2 or 3 years ago, but I think that void times have crept up again. I think in Mid-Suffolk more than in Babergh. When I last looked at the figures, that was the case. I don't think there's any particular reason for that. Are you optimistic? I'm sure you're optimistic. Can we expect that the void times will come down? And is the reason that they've gone up the availability or lack of availability of tradespeople and materials?
So I am optimistic. I'm always optimistic, and I always have a plan. So I have been working on voids, and there's a number of things we've already put in place. Firstly, we've got a subcontractor who can help us with the the backlog of voids, because we have got a backlog now, and we can't expect to be completing all those voids with the team we've got internally. So our new contractor, we're hoping will start at the beginning of February. So that is the first mitigation. Number two, what we've been doing is we've been replacing kitchens and bathrooms in voids. That's not cost effective. Also holds up the void, doesn't give tenant a choice. And so what we've done around that is we're developing our component replacement plans. So these are our capital plans, kitchens and bathrooms. And as of a couple of weeks ago, I gave the teams the instruction that now all kitchens and bathrooms, unless absolutely necessary, have to be put in the plan. That will bring down the cost as well, because it's a lot more expensive to do a kitchen or a bathroom in a void than it is to do in a planned way. So that's mitigation number two. Mitigation number three, in the short term, what we do have is we have I'll be really honest, we've got a lot of voids that need work doing. So my priority and the priority of the team is to get people housed as soon as possible. So we've changed the approach to voids, and the work in the voids is now housing led. So twice a week, the housing team are having a meeting with the voids team, and they're saying, right, these are the properties we've got allocated, and these are the properties we want you to concentrate on. So do the works first. So what that means is we house people quicker, and they're not waiting. So those are 3 steps we've taken in the short term to try and mitigate what is quite a significant issue. There will of course be more systemic changes coming through with the transformation plan. But of course, we know it's really important that we can't just sort of rest on our laurels and wait for a transformation to start. We have to, we have to, do what we can now. And the increase in the voids in terms of rent loss is linked to the increase in in rents, so the cost of the rents.
Yeah, I think I understand. You're saying if we shorten the void time, we increase the income.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Has anybody got any further questions for Deborah, in case she fades off the screen? Well, thank you very much for your input. Any further questions from anyone? Councillor Ekping.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at Table 2 on page 7 in the General Fund section, I noticed, and I'm curious as to why our interest payable is going to shoot up by, well, almost a factor of 4, by £800,000, given that, the significant capital receipts that we've received. It seems rather odd that interest payable should be shooting up by that much, if at all.
I'm thinking it's really because we're coming off such a low base in terms of interest rates, with base rates going up from 0.5% to 4.5% or whatever. But I'll just ask Melissa to either say yes to that or counteract me.
Thanks, Councillor Whitehead, and thanks for the question. So a lot of the short-term loans we currently have still got a term to mature, so they are maturing partway through 23-24, so we can't, clear those any earlier than the maturity. We'd end up paying the interest that we were due to pay on them, so we need to let those run their course. So there is an element of increased charges for next year until we can actually not renew those loans, if that makes sense. No. So when we took the loans out, some of them had a term to run, say for example, until July this year. So we need to build in the interest, the increased interest that we would be paying on that going forward.
So are you saying that they were not at fixed interest rates?
Some of them we've taken out later this year, so they're not 0.4%. They're at the higher rate. So we have been having to take some loans out before we got the capital receipt back from Gateway 14. So they have got a term to mature at a higher rate.
Still seems a hell of a lot of money from where we were. I think, some explanation of that increase in more detail would be desirable.
Just checking with my colleague to the right here, there's also an element of new borrowing in there because there are some schemes coming forward that we will do some borrowing. So whilst it will put us on a, if you like, a level field without no borrowing, the investment we're going to be doing in our capital programme will mean that we will need to take out some more borrowing going forward. So that will come at a cost.
So why are we needing to borrow so much money if we've got plenty of surpluses?
As I say, it's not putting us in a surplus position. It's putting us in a break-even position, if you like, in our bank balance. So we won't be necessarily sitting with a huge surplus because we've got about £40 million worth of short-term borrowing. So it's not going to put us in a huge surplus position. And with the investment that we're proposing in the capital programme for a lot of the big schemes coming forward, we'll then be needing to borrow on top of that.
Do I have any further questions from members? Can we move on to debate? Is there anyone who wants to debate any aspect? I think Councillor Ekping, you had a suggestion for adding to the recommendation.
I think my only point would be that we look at increasing the locality budgets for the next financial year, Chairman.
Thank you. Is there anything that anyone else would like as a supplementary recommendation to go to Cabinet? So we are asked to note the draft revenue budget set out in the report for 23-24 General Fund and Housing Revenue Account. And we ask Cabinet to consider an increase in the locality award allocation to each member. Councillor Scarf.
If you need a seconder for that particular reference, I'm quite happy to second.
Have I? Well, thank you. Are you happy with what I have quoted back to you, Councillor Ekping-Yong, as your proposal? Thank you. So we have a proposal, we have a seconder. And do you want to type that in, or shall I just read it out?
That's fine, Chair. If members are happy with what you've just read out, then we'll take that as given to the vote.
So it will now go on to the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. So that is 6 votes for recommendations, so that's unanimous.
Members, the monitoring officer will be with us at 2:30 for the call-in item. Are you happy if we wait till 2:30, but in the meantime, we can look at items 7 and 8, which are the forthcoming decisions list. Has anybody got any comments on forthcoming decisions list? No? Thank you. The forthcoming decisions list is for noting. And our overview and scrutiny work plan. Does anyone have any comments? The Babergh overview and scrutiny meeting this morning, they suggested adding an item to their work plan around something around a business plan for public realm, looking at whether or not Babergh district had a better service, a more cost-effective service as a result of the insourcing of their mowing and cutting, their public realm contract. It had been contracted out prior to about 12 months ago. They've now had 12 months of it being in-house. Before that happened, we as a committee, Mid Suffolk, had concerns around a potential loss of service or increased cost if the whole service were brought in. Babergh have said they'd like to have a look at all of that. So rather than they have a look at it from the Babergh point of view, would you be happy if we added that to the joint overview and scrutiny work plan rather than just to the Babergh overview and scrutiny work plan? So if you are, I'm seeing nods, so we will do that, and when you'll see the revised work plan at the next meeting. So we'll have a break now for around 10 minutes, and if we can all be back here in about 10 minutes' time, we should then be item 9, which is the call-in of Mid-Suffolk Cabinet decision on 7th of December 2022. Before we look at the call-in itself, we're asked to consider and approve the call-in protocol. Members, you've all had an opportunity to read through the protocol that we're asked to adopt for this item. We need to adopt this protocol before we consider the details of the call-in. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Caston. And could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Muller. I'll now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That is 6 votes for, so that's unanimous.
Right, this is how we're going to go through this item. In a minute, I will read out the call-in notice. Then the next steps will be as follows. The lead signatory, Councillor Mellon, will explain the reason for the call-in and why the committee should scrutinise the decision taken by Cabinet. He has a maximum of 10 minutes. Councillor Morley will have 10 minutes to present the reasons why the decision was taken by Cabinet. Committee members will then ask questions of Councillor Mellon and Councillor Morley. Questions must fall within the scope of the call-in. Committee members may then ask questions of officers and/or other members if there are any in attendance, members of Cabinet. Committee members may then ask further questions of Councillor Mellon and/or Councillor Morley. Councillor Morley will then provide a summary of her case, and she has 5 minutes. Councillor Mellon will then provide a summary of his case, and he has 5 minutes. Members of Cabinet and the lead signatory will then leave the meeting. Members of the committee will then debate the issue. Members will need to decide whether to refer the matter back to Cabinet or to uphold the Cabinet decision, in which case it will be implemented immediately. Either way, reasons for the committee's decision are required, and it is not appropriate for this matter to be referred to Council. So we have 2 choices. We either refer it back to Cabinet or we uphold the decision. So are we all content? We've approved the protocol, but that's just an explanation. Right. This is a call-in notice, a call-in of the Cabinet decision MCA 2227 Elmswell Exemplar Housing Scheme made on 7th of November 2022. We, the undersigned, while supporting the intention to bring forward exemplar housing in the district, wish to call this Cabinet decision in for examination by the Scrutiny Committee for the following reasons. The Cabinet was not presented with all the information required in order to make an informed and sound decision. Whilst this area of land is owned by the HRA and the Cabinet report describes it as suitable for housing, it is also an important and well-used open space within Elmswell village. It is not clear that, in the current planning policy context and in the light of the very recent Development Control Committee decision on application DC 22-03423, also in Elmswell, that a planning application for housing on this site would be successful in gaining permission. The risk matrix grid on page 146 of the Cabinet papers describe the likelihood of the site not gaining permission as 2 and the impact as 3, and recommends in mitigation that thorough engagement with all stakeholders throughout the design and planning process. However, no information was presented as to whether any engagement had taken place with Development Control to support this assessment of the risk. No consequential test or supporting information was presented to Cabinet to validate the selection of this site above any other site or sites in the district for exemplar housing, other than that this is a large site within the ownership of the HRA. Other possibilities that had not been considered include a district-wide call for sites to deliver an exemplar scheme, which may well have brought forward more sustainable alternative sites in community or private ownership, or a land swap within Elmswell, which could provide an alternative location for the exemplar housing scheme, whilst keeping this site available for future education provision in Elmswell, which is the community's clearly stated intention. So we now go on to the lead signatory to present the reason for the call-in and why the committee should scrutinise the decision. Councillor Mellon, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm here representing the other signatories on the call-in, who were Councillors Mansell, Geek, Field, Otten, Matheson and Stringer. Unfortunately, none of the rest could be present this afternoon, or they may be watching it online. I'm grateful for the committee's time this afternoon to examine this call-in. I'd like to start with some opening remarks about the scheme before going on to look in detail at the reasons for the call-in request. I should probably also state for the record, although I called this decision in as a district councillor, I also represent Elmswell and the surrounding villages on the county council. The aspiration to deliver low-carbon homes is a good one, which we support. In fact, we wish that all new homes delivered in the district would be built in this way. It would go a long way towards meeting the district and the county's stated goal of reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2030. It would also provide homes which are cheap to run, a very important consideration when the cost of living has risen so much in the past year. We are also in complete and wholehearted agreement with the key design goals which were set out in point 11.3 of the Cabinet report. These being people and nature first, improving green infrastructure, using orientation for passive and active solar gain, respecting neighbouring properties and local heritage, and a fabric first and future-proof approach. These all would add up to provide a place which would be pleasant to live in, where walking and cycling are supported and encouraged, and where well-built homes are embedded in the living landscape. Again, these are principles that all developers should be following. But whilst supporting the broad intentions of this scheme and commending the officers' work on it, we do have some concerns about the decision, hence the call-in request. And there are two main aspects of this decision which we believe were not addressed either by the Cabinet report nor the subsequent debate at Cabinet on the 7th of November last year. And the first point is around planning. Whilst the piece of land in question is owned by the Council's HRA, it does not have even outline consent for house building. And whilst the area is allocated in the emerging joint local plan as potential development land, it's allocation LA 064 for around 60 homes. As we all know, the JLP is still under examination and adoption, even of Part 1, is still some way off in the future. So the land's current status is as a piece of well-used open amenity land towards the edge of a village which has seen an enormous amount of development in the last few years. So the key point is this: we have no indication that in the current policy context this site would gain permission for development. Surely a key consideration when deciding whether to move forward with the scheme. And just to illustrate this, there was a decision taken by Development Control Committee A on another application in Elmswell just 2 days after the Cabinet meeting. And this was for one dwelling to be built off Crown Mill, DC 22/03423, and that was refused. And the primary reason being, and I quote from the refusal notification, The site of this proposal is an existing area of open space and should only be built on if the local authority is satisfied that the requirements of paragraph 99 of the NPPF have been met. The open space is an intrinsically important amenity space for local residents and the community, contributing to their well-being. Its loss demonstrably adversely affects the character and appearance of the settlement and open space, which provide important facilities or amenities for the local community. So if that applies to the footprint for one dwelling, surely it would apply even more to the land under consideration for the 50-home development. However, in the committee report, we are given no indication of this. The risk matrix at 8.1, which is on page 6 of the Cabinet report, does acknowledge that the scheme may not achieve planning consent and suggests in mitigation thorough engagement with all stakeholders throughout the design and planning process. However, to date, no informal discussions with planning officers appear to have taken place, nor yet formal pre-planning advice. Or if it has taken place, it was not reported to Cabinet. The second main point of concern regarding this decision is the justification of this site for this scheme. Is this the best place? All we are told is that the land is in the ownership of HRA and is therefore suitable for housing. I think what would have been helpful would have been a list of all the HRA-owned sites above a certain size across the district with some kind of rough and ready ranking of their suitability for development for this type of scheme. This site has been chosen, but the Cabinet was not given information as to whether any sequential tests had been applied to the selection. It could also be the case that there is other land available in the district for a scheme such as this, land currently owned by parishes, communities, or even privately. And a district-wide call for sites may well have brought forward another site or sites which are suitable, or possibly more suitable or less contentious than this site. For example, land already in a community land trust. The Cabinet report states that there is need for affordable homes in Elmswell, but this is not quantified. And of course, Elmswell has seen a large number of new homes built in recent years, including some developments still under construction, many of which are delivering their proportion of affordable homes. And the Parish Council itself has plans to deliver an affordable housing scheme on land behind the Elmswell Tavern. So it's not clear how far the proposed Exemplar scheme meets the need for affordable homes in Elmswell, whether that need is already being met from existing developments, or whether the proposed Exemplar scheme would undermine the Parish Council's own plans. In conclusion, Mr Chairman, for the reasons I've outlined above, I believe that the Cabinet decision should be revisited. The Cabinet report may or may not be sound, but it was lacking, I believe, in some respects, incomplete, and more information is required if the Cabinet is to make a sound and informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mellon. We move straight on to Councillor Morley to present the reasons why the decision was taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In November, a report was brought to Cabinet to secure funding for the development of a site owned by the Council in Elmswell as an exemplar sustainable housing scheme. This would be subject to the usual development gateways being achieved, such as community engagement and seeking to achieve planning consent. The Cabinet supported the recommendations set out in the report because we are keen to deliver new, low-carbon, affordable and market housing, providing high-quality homes with lower running costs, which is even more important during the current cost of living challenges. Elmswell is a sustainable village benefiting from good public transport links and local facilities, and this site is already within the ownership of the Council, making it a viable option for an exemplar low-carbon scheme. By approving the budget and the appointment of our own development company, Mid Suffolk Growth Limited, at this early stage in the project, the Cabinet were enabling the project to progress through development gateways, and did so in the knowledge that if those gateways, such as planning and wider community engagement, were not successful, the development would not proceed. But equally, if the development gateways were achieved, that necessary budgets would be in place to progress the development. Since the Cabinet meeting in November and the subsequent call-in of that decision, the first public engagement event has been held with a number of residents attending to share their views, and a petition against the proposed development has also been received and noted by Cabinet. Alongside this, formal pre-application advice has been received from the Planning Authority. The Cabinet are keen to deliver housing that works well with existing communities, whilst delivering the Council's housing aspirations to provide high-quality housing for all. We value the contributions made by our residents, and in light of the consultation feedback and recent response from the Planning Authority, we feel it is right to return this item to Cabinet for further discussion on the options available at this time, and as such do not contest this calling. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think I need a bit of guidance on where we go from here. Do we still, monitoring officer, do we still go through the whole process even though the calling isn't contested?
Unfortunately, yes. Once you've gone through the process, then you make your decision based on what you've heard.
Fine, thank you very much. So, committee members, would you like to ask questions of the lead signatory and the Cabinet member? Questions to elicit further information. Councillor Scarf.
I've got one for Councillor Morley. We now know that the first round of engagement has been held, and we know that we've got formal pre-app advice from the planning officers. My question is, why wasn't the consideration of this advice before Cabinet actually looked at this site? Because I think it would have given you an idea of whether the planning officers were likely to recommend or not the planning application when it surfaced.
Thank you,
Morley.
Chair. If it's all right, I'll refer to my director.
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. So the purpose of this report was to secure budget so that we could progress this scheme. It was a very early stage, and still is very early stages, to see whether this scheme is viable and can move forward through those development gateways. So we had taken some informal planning advice over a number of years in relation to this site, and also reviewed the allocation in the emerging local plan. The consultation that needed to be undertaken needed a certain amount of drawings and information to share with the local population in order for that to be really beneficial, but we needed to secure the budget in order to take it any further. So there's an element of, it's a little bit chicken and egg in terms of what comes first. Obviously you don't spend that budget until you successfully progress through the development gateways.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Ekpington.
Chair, this is a question for Councillor Mellon. In the call-in, it's mooted that there is opposition to using this land for exemplar housing, but it might be actually more suitable to build a school, and I just wondered what the rationale for that would be.
Councillor Mellon?
Yeah. So it's been sort of strongly expressed to me by Elmswell Parish Council and by various residents that this site should be retained as used for a school. Now, we did have a meeting with the county schools planning officer a couple of weeks ago, where we were basically told there was no immediate need for a new school in Elmswell. If there was surplus pupils, that's probably the wrong phrase, pupils above and beyond what could be accommodated at the existing school in Elmswell, they would be educated over the A14 in Woolpit. This is strongly opposed by people in Elmswell, as you can probably understand. So whilst there's no immediate need for a new school in Elmswell, there's certainly a feeling in the community that this site should be retained, when a school may be needed in 15, 20 years' time. Now clearly that the school's in the HRA, the land's in the HRA, it has to be used for housing unless we can persuade the Secretary of State otherwise. There is potential for some creative thinking, I think, here, if there's a potential for a land swap within Elmswell with land that the parish council owns, just so that this site is retained for future education. It is certainly something that's held very strongly by the community. I think it doesn't bear perhaps a full examination because the numbers of pupils over the country has dropped, and they've recently expanded Elmswell School to some extent. I hope that answers the question.
Any further questions? Right. I think we've already had the opportunity to ask questions of officers. Are there any? Do you wish to ask any further questions of any officers? In that case, we move on, and I invite Councillor Morley to provide a summary of the case. You may not need 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. The Cabinet are keen to deliver housing that works well with existing communities whilst delivering the Council's housing aspirations to provide high-quality housing for all. We value the contributions made by our residents, and in light of the consultation feedback and recent response from the Planning Authority, we feel it is right to return this item to Cabinet for further discussion on the options available at this time, and as such do not contest this calling. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Mellon?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This proposal has been described as an exemplar scheme. I did look up the word exemplar in the dictionary, and it's described as a typical example or appropriate model. And I think what is meant in this context is that a development on this site, if successful, would serve as a template or pattern for the sort of development that would take place subsequently in other locations, i.e. we would learn from this development. I would just point out that Elmswell has already had an exemplar low carbon housing scheme, 26 homes at Clayfields, which were completed in 2008, and even won a number of awards. So it's not clear what lessons from that previous scheme are feeding into this current proposal. And the question is, are we doing the same thing again without really learning from what happened a few years ago? After the Cabinet meeting on the 7th of November, an article appeared in the East Anglian. I've got a copy of it here, which slightly unfortunately gave the headline, "Plan for 50 eco homes in £15 million project given go-ahead," and it seemed to indicate to people that this was a fait accompli, when clearly, as we know, and as has been discussed, this was only the first stage in a very long process. I think this did slightly tee up the community to strongly object to the proposals that came forward at the community engagement event. Clearly, we don't have any control of what the newspapers say, but it did cause a certain amount of consternation in the community. Elmswell Parish Council have proposed this potential land swap within the village, which would provide land for a low-carbon housing scheme whilst retaining the current site for future education provision. So if this proposal is to come back to Cabinet, which I'm glad to hear they're willing to discuss it again, I hope that this possibility will have been explored and discussed prior to a decision being made. I'm really pleased to hear that some formal pre-application planning advice has now been received, and I'd be very interested in seeing that if that's possible. Really grateful that the call-in's not contested, and I think we'll end up in a better place with a better decision if Cabinet looks at it again. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mellon. So at this point, I have to ask for Councillor Morley, Councillor Richardson and Councillor Mellon to leave. Thank you. Now we have an opportunity to debate the issue, and we have to take one of two possible courses of action, and whichever course of action we take, we have to give reasons why we either want to refer it back to Cabinet or to uphold the Cabinet decision and implement it immediately. Does anybody have a desire that the decision should be upheld and implemented immediately? I think not. So, if it's the case, then that members are minded to refer the matter back to Cabinet for reconsideration. What are our reasons for doing so? I think we've been offered a couple of reasons, and they were for further public engagement and to look at the planning advice, because it would appear that the planning advice has been sought and may have been received but has not been considered. So it's for further public consultation and consideration of the planning advice. So, Councillor Ekping-Yong.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm just mindful that given that Councillor Morley is happy to have this referred back to Cabinet, then presumably she's also happy that one of the points raised in the call-in regarding the review of alternative sites throughout the district should also be considered, which I think in itself would probably be a very useful exercise in any case.
Right. Is there anything else anyone would like to add? Councillor Caston.
Thank you very much. I won't keep you too long because it seems like we've got a direction we're going in now, and it's a very obvious direction. But all I wanted to say was I can understand the thought process behind this because we own the site. It's in the HRA account. So it does seem like a lot of what we're trying to do here is development control committee territory, and seeing whether the site's viable and whether whether it's acceptable to build houses on there. I think I hope this still happens because I've been very proud speaking to the parish councils about this site and the quality and the forward-lookingness of the way this is designed. I can understand residents' worries about it, but obviously that would go to a planning meeting and that would all be heard properly. It's just, it seems like this is exactly what we should be doing in the council. This is why I've spoken about this in parish council meetings and being a strong supporter of it, because we do need to build to a standard that we expect, and being on a planning committee, I see all the time things coming forward to a standard that's below this but is acceptable. So I'm not to finish. I just wanted to say it's I do feel like a lot of what we're doing here is we're doing work at the Development Control Committee, because the council's found a field and said that could have the exemplar housing on it, and then that's got to go to the Development Control Committee, just like any other business. So we're almost, I don't massively see the point of it, but as we're in this position, and as the leader of Mid Suffolk has said she's quite happy for it to go back to Cabinet, we'll leave it at that and it will go back to Cabinet. But it does worry me that this could not happen now, and I think this would be such a great thing for the area, and I understand that residents might disagree bitterly, and there's a petition of them saying that, but this sort of housing is exactly what we need. And Councillor Mellon said there's already been some in 2008, but I'd say we need exemplar housing everywhere in Mid Suffolk. Every house we build should be to this standard. Sadly, we're not going to get this, but I don't think just because there's been some before, we should say, well, that's not changed anything, because I think it does. And the more we can, the better standard for environmentally friendliness and efficiency of houses, the better, in my view. But sorry.
I think you're agreeing with much of what Councillor Mellon said. I think that where he and you would probably differ is whether it has to be in Elmswell, when Elmswell has already got several hundred new affordable homes built to a lower standard. And I think the point is, if that were the best place in the whole of the district to have another exemplar scheme, all well and good. But if it's not the best place, and we don't know whether it is unless other sites are considered.
But, Mr. Chairman, if I may, what my answer to that would be, this is our HRA land that we own, that we're not going to have to buy. And this scheme doesn't work if we buy the land. The figures don't add up. We can't do it. We can't possibly do it. So we might have other options that's within the HRA account. I haven't seen them, but for this kind of development, this is the perfect place, and we own the land. But the Development Control Committee would decide on that. And Councillor Mellon said he broadly supports the intentions of the scheme. But what is this Cabinet decision if it's not the intentions of the scheme are supported? Let's let the Planning Committee do the details and work out whether that's acceptable.
I understand.
Do you know what I'm saying? But I know that we're going one way with this meeting, and I don't want to keep everyone here all afternoon. But I just felt like unpacking what I was thinking about this in my head, and I hope you don't mind.
No, thank you very much. Councillor Pignon, your hand was up. Are you in a position to make a proposal before we go any further?
Not quite yet.
Right.
No. I think the point I wanted to make is that although there have been exemplar homes built in Elmswell previously, they clearly would have been built to a technology of the time, and indeed technology has moved on massively. And I don't know if anyone's actually looked at the scheme that's being proposed, but it is basically using the most modern technologies and materials to deliver what will be outstanding homes for the community. And I think the other point to point out is that this land actually if we were to go down the route that Councillor Mellon suggested, could then lie fallow for a large number of years when we know that housing, especially affordable housing and green housing, if we may use that term, is much more, has a much more immediate demand. And to confirm Councillor Caston's point, yeah, the scheme is not going to get off the ground if we have to buy the land.
Right. There's probably no... Oh, Councillor Carter, sorry.
I'd like to say that I completely agree that we should be setting this as the standard. As has been argued for I don't know how many years, but we should be holding exemplar housing for many years. It's just unfortunate that we seem to have skipped a step in not doing the public correct engagement beforehand, where the engagement with the ideas were already in place, and that the option of a land stop, which may not have been raised if it had run straight to planning, it may not have been heard or might have been the right place. But I certainly agree, fully supportive of we all supportive of the exemplar housing, but we do have to be mindful as well of not just housing now, we have to be mindful of what is necessary for the future. And if we are looking at putting housing in place, making it so that people moving into the area may have to leave their children on a bus going to cross the A14, may not have places there, may not actually have a bus, a place to go place. I would argue that a bus that comes twice a day isn't exactly the most ideal thing, rather than it being fully transport supported. But if we get the engagement right first, and then move on decisions later, ideal, but fully supportive that it goes back to Cabinet to have an idea, to have the engagement and get the footwork in place properly, rather than just saying that we're throwing the baby out of bathwater. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody in a position to make a proposal, please? Councillor Ekpignon.
I would propose that we don't refer this back to Cabinet.
We don't refer it back?
Correct.
Do we have a seconder?
No second.
Right. We will need... Are you happy... Are you content that we now take a vote on that without any further debate? We will take a vote that it is not referred back to Cabinet. We have to take the vote, don't we? Look at the yes.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress.
See if it works this time.
Thank you, Chair. That is 3 votes for and 3 against.
I will therefore use my casting
Yep.
vote against.
Thank you, Chair. So that motion is lost.
Thank you. Do we have a counter proposal? Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. Well, bearing in mind that the Cabinet are prepared to take another look at it, I can't see why we can't refer the matter back to Cabinet for reconsideration. I think we've had some valid reasons given as part of the call-in, which you've already illustrated to us, so they can form our observations, and then Cabinet can take a final decision. But I'd just like to query, if the matter goes back to Cabinet and then Cabinet makes a decision, is that then exempt from a call-in in future if members feel that the Cabinet still made the wrong decision at a later date of Cabinet? Just a technical query, because I would like to know what that would be, but I'm quite happy to make the recommendation.
Yes, Chair, that's quite correct. If it's a referral back to Cabinet from this committee, then it's exempt from calling when the final decision is made.
If they debate it and they come up with something different but quite similar, then that is not exempt from calling.
No, if it's a different decision,
Yeah.
yes. But if it's the same.
So we need reasons. So the reasons that Councillor Morley gave were that they would take it back for further public engagement and consideration of planning advice before further decision by Cabinet. And one of you said, and consideration of other sites within the district. So would you wish that to be added?
Yeah, I'm very happy for that to be added, Chair, because I think unless you consider other sites in the district, you don't know. The answer may well be there are no other sites,
Yeah.
but I think consideration should be taken by the Cabinet.
Okay. So that then reads something along the lines of, we refer the matter back to Cabinet for reconsideration with the following observations of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, that officers hold further public engagement and the Cabinet consideration of other sites within the district and consideration of planning advice before a decision taken by Cabinet. Something along those lines? Do I have a seconder?
I did wonder, would it be mindful to put in there somewhere regarding the land swap to be mindful of, or is that not necessary?
I don't think it's necessary to put it in there. If they're going to consider other sites, they have to, in my view, it would have to be a wide consideration, and that offer has been made, so they can't consider other sites without considering the site that's been offered to them, in my view. So can we put that, are you content to put that to the vote? So are you?
Do we have a second?
Oh, sorry, yes. You're happy to second? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That is 4 votes for, 1 against and 1 abstention. So that's carried.
I believe that now is the end of the meeting. If I look at my script. Thank you very much. Yes, so that concludes the business of the meeting, and it is 3:15.